afternoon or good evening, everyone. Thank you for participating today and a warm welcome to all of you. In the next hour, we're going to discuss the topic international trade law in a changing world. And I think this is a very trending topic because many things are changing because our world is digitalizing. And we will focus specifically today on the terms international trade law. What does this mean? What is its purpose? Who does it affect? And even if you may not consider this, it's affecting each and every one of us, no matter where you are located. So before we delve deeper into the topic, I want to inform you that today's lecture will be recorded as a reminder. And the lecture, will provide a comprehensive understanding. It's more for educational purpose and it does not constitute any legal advice. So thank you all for being here and thank you, Professor. If we think about international trade law specifically, what does that mean? We are going to discuss today an introductory lecture because the international law in the changing world, it basically consists of many different things of treaties between different countries. But we will delve deeper into this. But we're also going to understand the general legal framework and think of the World Trade Organization as well. Because many people, if they think about international trade law, they think about the WTO. We will also explore some geopolitical shifts, which is very important because every country, they have their own interests, and think of the different trade wars like with China and the States, Russia, Ukraine, and how this affects on global cross-border e-commerce. We will also think about sustainability concerns and maybe even more importantly, human rights, how this can be affected. So think of a trade embargo and how this can shape trade regulations and supply chains. So this lecture aims to provide you all a comprehensive understanding suitable for students from all backgrounds. And today, hopefully, we will lay the framework for a deeper exploration. And I think this is a very fascinating topic. It's also a crucial area of law because our world is really interconnected nowadays. And I think this will only get more intense over the years. So today we are going to dive a bit deeper into international trade law. And we are going to break things down in a way that are more easy to understand. Because many components of international trade law, they affect our daily lives. Think, for example, of the phone you bought, most likely it's made in China or in a different country. And all these regulations, they do affect our daily life and our global economy. Or think about job opportunities or human rights. So before we're going to start, I have an interactive question. And I would like to give you all 2 minutes to think about what does international trade law means? What does it mean? Do we have keywords or examples we can think of? I will give you now 2 minutes to think about it and you can answer in the chat and then we will proceed.
Thank you very much, Miss Davidson. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an invitation from our SME, Miss Lynette Davidson. Like she said, this is going to be a very interactive session, which definitely requires your involvement, your participation, and the warm-up question we have right now on our screens. What is the meaning of international trade law? How do you understand this concept of international trade law? I haven't seen anything as of yet on the chat box, but one of the options is definitely to jot down what you believe this concept implies. You may go ahead and in the chat box, like done it. Akande wrote that's a trade between two countries. So go ahead, brothers and sisters, uh, like Akande did, go ahead and participate, get involved, collaborate with us. Let's just team up together with Miss Lynette Davidson The chat box is now open up to you. Go ahead to write your comments. Charles Carrigo wrote, the generally accepted rules and regulations which government international trade. This is verbatim what Charles Kotzi wrote. Thank you very much, Charles, for your participation, for your input. Reminding you, brothers and sisters, we are with Miss Lynette Davidson with her presentation on international trade law. The floor is yours, Miss Davidson.
Thank you for sharing your input, first of all. And it's very correct. It helps us to understand the laws across the many jurisdictions and how they interrelate. And especially the part how they interrelate is really important because the countries are supposed to think of regulations and treaties together. So if we think of international trade law, what does it mean? It basically governs the rules and principles that regulate trade between countries, and it's shaped by treaties, tribunals, agreements, and other legal instruments. So if we think about international trade, we also have to think about the environment because trade really affects the environment. For example, if you think about the export of rice, for example, or palm oil, we need to make agreements together because it can have a very severe impact on the environment. Or for example, think about third world countries. If we want to give them a chance to enter the global trade markets, sometimes they need a bit of help. So maybe the taxes could not work for a country which is a bit more vulnerable. So it basically regulates the interrelationship with the environment, but it also seeks to balance economic development, which is a very important aspect. And this is why many countries all over the world they work together. In total, there are now 164 members who are part of the WTO. So if you now think of any item, for example, ladies and gentlemen, you've purchased online from any other country, because you think international trade law, it seems quite abstract, right? Maybe you don't really have any idea of what it should look like. But international trade law basically is present almost everywhere. Even if you buy a product from a different country, there are rules that apply that are related to the purchase of the product to import the product to your home country. So maybe you have had any experience when you bought something from abroad, from a foreign jurisdiction, and there were some challenges you faced. If you have any idea, please share your experience with us in the chat so we can make it a bit more realistic. Because there are many challenges we could face, for example, when buying a product from abroad and you would like to import the product. Maybe there was any challenge you experienced in the past, or something that you would like to share with us. I will give you 1 minute to share your thoughts and experience with us today.
That's another invitation, brothers and sisters, to share your thoughts on this second interactive warm-up question. How many of you have purchased something online from another country? You may count me in, Miss Davidson. I've done that several times. I love to buy things online, stay home in the comfort of my home and get anything I need. I love that. How many of you? Thank you, Dino Mukavele. Thank you, Kennedy. Those are two participants who just responded positively. They've done it. What challenges did you face also in the process of buying online? This is another question from Miss Davidson on our screen, brothers and sisters. Invitation once again to participate.
I see a couple of hands raised here. Can I ask you to unmute and share your experience, Kennedy?
Go ahead, Kennedy. Just tell us what your comments are, what your point of view is. Oh, Kennedy has disappeared, unfortunately. Probably did not intend to share. Dino Mukayele, what do you think? Dino, unmute your mic, please.
Hi, how are you?
All right.
Eddie, no. Thank you for being
Fine.
here.
Thanks. I'm Dino Mkavele from Mozambique. I've been exporting some cell phones, some watches, and other stuff from China.
All right.
The experience that I have from there is the quality itself. It can come in time. They send it in time. Sometimes they say in a month it will be here. It comes, but most of the time is the quality itself. It's not good, and it's difficult for you to go back and ask for that. Even to
To be
return it back
fixed.
is very difficult. Yeah, that's the
Yes.
experience I got.
All
And Dina,
right.
what did you
Thanks.
experience regarding the rules? Are the rules different than in your own home country regarding the return of products, or, for example, reimbursement or warranty, guarantee? Were there any challenges you faced with the purchase from abroad?
Yeah, from the experience, the rules are not difficult to retain it, but um, what is difficult is the export transport. You have to pay it again, so it will be
Yeah,
double cost for you. But the rules are themselves are not difficult to retain it.
no, but the costs involved could be quite challenging and could be an obstacle, right?
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
a perfect example, Dino. Thank you for sharing your experience with us.
Thanks.
And also think, for example, about taxes, rights, or tariffs, or because if you have to import products, you have to pay the transport fees, but also other taxes could be applicable. We will delve into some of the principles of the WTO to make international trade more fair. So it's great that you shared the example with us today. And I see we have some answers in the chat too. It could be challenging to return items. This is also very true because of the additional costs involved. So now we discuss some examples. What does international trade law mean? It basically regulates the exchange across borders, and we can think of the movement of goods like buying cell phones or different products from different countries. And it should be the backbone of the global economy because we need something to regulate international trade. Because when we work with different countries and we have to export or import goods, we need to have some rules and prevent discrimination between countries as well. This is really important. Now, there is a legal framework that governs trade relations between states. So please keep in mind this is not the same as trade relations between specific companies in a country. It's between states, so of the jurisdictions on a higher level. And it's basically arranged through WTO agreements. There are many and bilateral treaties. Now, public international law is also international, but that's trade law that exists within the broader context of relationships between sovereign states. And public international is not the same as private international law. It's different. The purpose and facilitate trade between countries. So there is a legal and structured framework. So basically, think of the terms of service for public marketing places. So we can also promote global economic stability and growth because if we have rules, we can ensure more global economic stability. if nations are compliant with the rules and they act accordingly. So think of the COT Commission, for example, or airplanes, etc. And we also need to reduce trade barriers so we can become all more involved on a equal level. Now, there is also a dispute resolution method, which means basically that countries will have to try to resolve the disputes first directly. If this doesn't help, they can go to the tribunal, which is there to help resolve disputes between nations. The international trade law, its purpose is basically to encourage cooperation. This is why many countries are also involved and an active member, because they want to strengthen their economic partnership. It's not only about creating rules, it also helps them to give them a benefit in the end. Because if you can create better partnerships, you can also help your economy to grow. Another key item is to think about fairness and predictability, because every country should treat the other country basically the same on a similar level. This will help to create a more transparent system of rules for businesses and countries so that you can trade with confidence, because you need a predictable and transparent system, right? You need to know what you can expect from a country. If you're trading with Malaysia or, for example, with Qatar, you need to be able to know what type of rules you have to comply with and the taxes, for example, or how you can best trade with other countries to create a better global economy as well. Now, there are many competing interests between different countries. Think about the environment, um, think about the rainforest, for example, or labor rights. People in China could be much cheaper than when you hire somebody in the States. Also, think about public health, which is a major concern. Think about all the emissions, the gas emissions, for example, in Asia, that could be of a huge risk for the population. So overall, if you think of international trade law, it seeks to basically create a more fair and efficient and sustainable global trading system, which is beneficial to all the parties involved. Now, it's quite difficult to find a balance. It's not only about the exchange of goods and services on an international level. We can see here that it's about much more than only about the trade, right? It's about the interests of the countries involved, but also about the health of the population of the nations. And it's mainly there to help us all to be protected and to have a more predictable system. So if we think about governing trade law, international trade law, we can think, for example, about the rules that apply between Russia and Ukraine, right? Because there have been trade embargoes, or we can think about the trade between USA and China, what's going on there, for example, because the states would like to help to grow their own economy more. So they raise the import taxes, for example. Um, the key players in international trade law, then who do we think of? Well, we can think of governments, but we can also think about international organizations, and we can also think about businesses. So those three could be key players involved in the international trade law. You can also think about human rights organizations, for example, or other international organizations that try to balance competing interests as well. Now, what does the legal framework do? It tries to balance the national interests with the promotion of open and efficient global trade, because different countries, they have their own specific trade laws and regulations, right? So per country we have our own legal framework, and then we also have an international legal framework, international trade law. So the countries, they try to seek a balance together which works for the countries involved, which is predictable and tries to balances the competing interests. Now, if we look at the map, we can see that there are like 164 countries involved. And international trade law basically provides the structure for global commerce. It will help to establish predictable rules. You can think about cross-border transactions when you buy something from a different country. And we can think about trade agreements, custom regulations, tariffs, anti-dumping measures, and dispute resolution mechanisms. And it also aims to protect those who are vulnerable. And I think this is a really important item because some countries, they have a very strong economic framework already. Some countries are much more left behind. So it tries to make it more equal on a global level, and um, it will help other countries to get more involved as well and improve their economy as well. And if we work all together in a better way and a more balanced way, we can also think about a better environment, and we can create more sustainable rules as well. So now, if we think about the scope of international trade regulations, then we think about 4 different aspects here. The first one is the trade agreements. Think about the WTO framework, bilateral and regional deals. We can think about customs, think about border procedures, documents you need, and the classification of systems. So, for example, if you want to export dangerous goods, we have rules that you have to comply with because of the safety for people, right? Maybe you are aware with this, or maybe you traveled with batteries, for example, or maybe something else that was classified as a dangerous product. There are rules on a global level as well to seek a balance here as well when products have to be imported or exported. The borders are also like taking care of documentation requirements. We can think of taxes on imports, limitation on the quantity of goods. For example, many countries is not allowed to travel with meat, for example. And there is a dispute resolution mechanism to help settle disagreements. So what we see here, we see basically 4 different aspects, and they all try to help balance national interests. And then it aims to promote an open and efficient global trade on the other hand. So as you can see here, it's quite difficult to keep into account all these different aspects at the same time, because every country, they have their own interests, and all their interests must be still considered in international business transactions. So it's difficult to work together if you have different interests. That's why also some key items are prioritized. And we have regulations to comply with, for example, when it's related to safety measures as well. If we now think about the public international law and private international law, what do you think could be the difference here? Well, public international law basically governs the relationship between sovereign states. So there is the WTO dispute settlement, there are economic regulations, and we have trade agreements. You do not have to write along with us. The PowerPoint will be shared with you all at the end of the class. If we think about now private international law, this is different than private international law, ladies and gentlemen. It refers to the contractual disputes between companies, for example. In the event of any dispute between a company in, let's say, the Netherlands and a company in the States, you have to first determine which legal system is applicable, who is the competent courts, which country allows you to seek legal remedies. So this regulates cross-border commercial conflicts. Public international law is between countries, so it's on a higher level. So that's the difference between public and private. Private is between entities, for example, commercially involved. Public governs the public states, the nations on a higher level. International trade law is embedded within public international law because it concerns the relationship between the states and the rules they agreed to follow in the trade activities, because there has been consensus made before. Now, private law becomes relevant when you have to address a dispute between different companies on a global level. And like mentioned before, the first step will be to determine which legal system applies to a contract. For example, when there's a dispute between a French company and a American entity. So this is different. And it's important to keep the difference in mind because public international law is about states between the different states and privates between different companies, for example. Now, why is international trade law so important today? If we look at the global market, you can see here the numbers. The numbers are really, really high. Nowadays, we actually have 166 WTO members involved in the WTO, which is really high as well. And as we can see, because our world becomes more globalized and we have all more access than before to information from abroad, markets from abroad, things are getting more digitalized. We may need more rules and we need more clear rules because we have more cross-border transactions. Like 50 years ago, for example, without internet, it will be much more difficult to trade on an international level like we can do nowadays. We need rules to ensure fairness and predictability, but also to prevent discrimination. So if you now think about a product that will be affected by trade laws, could you maybe name any example of a product that will be that has to comply with the rules created between the nations? And if so, maybe you could also answer what rules might apply. I will give you a minute or two to think about this question, ladies and gentlemen, to make it more interactive, and maybe you already have some examples you would like to share with us today.
That's another one, brothers and sisters. Can you give an example of a product that would be affected by trade laws, if you know of any? Go ahead, preferably on the chat box. Go ahead and write down what you think. An example of a product that would be affected by trade laws, what rules might apply as well. Natural gas and mineral, that's Steve Calpe. Thank you, brother. Oil, natural gas, and minerals. That is from Steve Calpe. Just gold, Jacob. Energy, that is Charles. Zacharias is energy. Dry fish from Zambia, that is Charles. Weapons from John RPG. Medicine, Bala Musa. Beautiful answers. Thank you for your involvement, brothers and sisters.
Thank you. Those are great examples. And then it's also important to think about what would happen if there would not be any trade regulation applicable. So, for example, if we export dangerous goods, it could be at a high risk for people, right? It could be at a higher cost or about the environment. So it's important to think about trade laws because they seek a balance between the interests between different countries. And these rules are here to protect us, but also to help us grow. We can also think about blockchain, for example. Think about crypto, bitcoins. Is this a legal method to pay and transfer money? Some countries they prefer not to allow this. Some countries they are in favor. Think of cybersecurity because we have more transfer of international data between nations. So as we can see, because the world becomes more globalized, there are new challenges, but also opportunities for international trade law. And as e-commerce, blockchain technology, and data flows, they become more central to transactions, we also need to think about different rules because some legal frameworks that have been created before are not complete or correct anymore to address the complexities between countries. For example, if there's any data leak or if there's an AI product that you can speak with and people will use it in the wrong way, then who is going to be held liable? So there are new rules sometimes needed. And even if we create rules, could these rules be sufficient to protect all interests? Now, if we look at the WTO, the World Trade Organization, It was established in 1995, created after the Second World War. We have a global membership, and it has comprehensive agreements that covers many, many different items. You can go to the website and look for more information if you'd like to find out more. There is a binding dispute settlement system, which is quite unique. And it basically stands at the forefront of international trade regulation, and it needs to provide the framework to help negotiate agreements, but also to resolve disputes. So it's basically the backbone of international trade law. And now there are some core principles created as well to help countries work together. And these principles are really important. And we're going now to discuss them. And then we're also going to think about if these principles are absolute or if maybe there are exceptions. The first one is the most favored nation treatment. So, for example, if we think about equal advantages, if a WTO member grants a trade advantage to another country, it must extend the same benefit to all other WTO members. This is really important because it helps to prevent preferential treatment, but it will also ensure equal market access for all trading partners. Now, the other thing you can think about is tariff equality. If a country will lower tariffs on products from one country, it must apply the same reduced rates to other members as well. This is also to help prevent discrimination, and it creates a level of playing field basically without thinking about the country of origin. This is really important because you have to be sure that all countries are treated equally without any privilege. If we think about universal application, it basically means that it applies to goods, services, and intellectual property. So it's universal. And the broad application will help to maintain system-wide fairness. So it doesn't only apply to one specific type of product, which is also really important. This helps to create more transparency. Now, if we think about the other one, it's the national treatment standards. I think the last part of the slides fell off, maybe. Let me see. If we think about the national treatment standard, then maybe what do you think this could mean? It also helps to regulate more transparency. And basically, it means that once products are already on the market, they must be treated the same as domestic products. So, for example, products that have been imported from other countries, they must be treated the same as their own national products. So, you cannot treat a product more favorably than another product from abroad. You have to have a equal treatment. So, how products are treated on a national level must be applied to other products as well. So as we can see here, also this rule helps to prevent discrimination. Now, if you think about these rules, do you think these rules are absolute, or do you think there could be any exception made here? Could you please share your answers with us with a yes or no? And if you think yes, I am eager to hear your arguments. And if you think no, then also please share your arguments with us.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have 2-3 minutes to think about this new question from our presenter, Lynette Davidson. The rules she just mentioned, do you believe that they are absolute? If yes or no, share with us arguments supporting whatever stand you are taking on this new topic. Do you think these rules are absolute or not? Time to get your involvement again, ladies and gentlemen. We love to read from you. The chat box is open. Remember, we are on the topic of international trade law at Atlantic International University. And this is a time again call for your participation. Thank you Oniachom, yes. Thank you, Pardis, yes, also. But whatever position you take on this topic, share with us as well whatever arguments you have to support your affirmative or negative position. Like Steve wrote, yes, because of the daily changing world environment. Thank you, Steve. No, that is Charles. They are relevant, only that in Africa, the leaders do not appreciate that. That is from Charles. Uh, Now, John also believes no, the rules are not absolute because they are exceptions to any rule. God-free, the laws are absolute because it would imply frauds, dumping, and fake products. Thank you, God-free. That's the few responses that we have, Miss Lynette Davidson.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with me today. That's really helpful. And it's also quite interesting that we can see that there are many people leaning towards the yes and also many students leaning towards a no. Some of the answers are correct, some of them are partially correct. But if we think about rules, like one student mentioned, rules are almost never abstract, which is the correct answer here. The key elements here about non-discrimination, the most favorite treatment, and also the national treatment rule, they are here to prevent discrimination. However, there is always an exception that could apply if the interest could be more important. So if we think about exceptions to the WTO principles, then which four do we have? These ones are really important, but they could also be taken abuse of. So if we think about general exceptions, we think about protecting the public health, the environment, and national security. This is called the general exceptions. This is the first one. If we think about emergency exceptions, we can think about a pandemic like COVID or a natural disaster like a tsunami, for example. If these things happen, then the country could be declared in the state of emergency and you can still deviate from the rules. Some countries, they extend the state of emergency and then they can deviate for a longer period from the rules. If we now think about the region, what can happen on a more regional level, we can think about customs unions or, for example, free trade areas. Like within the European Union, we have free trade zones. This could also be beneficial to help countries grow. This is basically between specific countries. Now we also have the enabling clause, and the enabling clause is really important. This is especially created for developing countries because they need sometimes a bit more support to help um, them to be able to trade on the same type of level. So developing countries, they could be subject to the enabling clause. So as we can see here, we do have rules. We have some principles for the World Trade Organization to prevent discrimination and to help create a better market access. We can see that they are not abstract because our real world is unfortunately a bit more chaotic. We need a bit more flexibility. There could always be unforeseen circumstances. And for these type of situations, we need to have a bit more flexibility. This is why we have exceptions that acknowledge that countries may need to prioritize their own specific values or their own safety. And this could be temporarily, but we need to be able to deviate from standard trade rules to help protect other interests when needed. So these exceptions have been carefully examined over the past years, and they try to help balance free trades. And they also allow the system to adapt wherever it's needed to unforeseen circumstances. So we have general exceptions related to protecting public health, the environment, national security. We have regional arrangements, which basically addresses custom unions and free trade areas. And then we have emergency exceptions, like with COVID or tsunami or hurricane, which is really important. And then we have the enabling clause for developing countries. These four are really important to take into account because they will allow us as a nation to adapt to unforeseen circumstances and help to protect the people who are involved. So now if we look a bit deeper, like what do general exceptions for public welfare mean? Well, for example, if you think about dangerous materials or products that could pose significant health risks or pharmaceutical products, some of them are forbidden. Europe is quite strict with this compared to the States, for example. Or think about specific food products. If there is a disease among a specific type of species, an animal species, the import of specific animals could be limited. So these measures must be scientifically justified. Okay, this is important. There needs to be proof of evidence. We also can think about the environment. So think about the protection of natural resources like the rainforests, or think about bans on products or restrictions on goods that help to contribute to pollution. And national security, we can think about technologies, for example, a specific type of electric tools. They can read all your data. These type of tech products could be limited as well to regulate international tensions between countries. So we can see here that different interests are at stake and we need to find a balance here. Now, if we think about the region, we can think about um, the trade-free zones, like for example, the European Union, but also about the States and Mexico, or the African Continental Free Trade Area. They will help a specific group of countries basically to work together more closely and to help their economic growth. So they actually do permit preferential treatment among specific members of the World Trade Organization here towards non-members. This is an important difference here. Now, the enabling clause, what does it do for developing nations? Well, if we think about a preferential market access, it's not allowed, right, like we've seen before, to discriminate amongst WTO members. However, if it's the developed countries, they can offer lower tariffs to developing countries because they need some other benefits to create the same opportunity for economic growth because they don't have the same tools or money as it's available. They also have a bit more flexible implementation. They have more time to implement certain WTO obligations, so they can gradually adjust to the international standards and requirements because sometimes they don't have the framework yet or the construction to comply with specific rules. And there is also the technical assistance, like for example, if they uh, need to provide capacity building to support developing countries integrate, then this could also be offered technical assistance. So it's basically called the enabling clause, but it used to be known as the decision on differential and more favorable treatments. So it looks like discrimination, but it actually helps to prevent discrimination on the long-term run because developing countries, they have special needs, and this allows developed countries, yeah, to still participate in a more global trading system without not being compliant. If you think about emergency exceptions, well, I'm sure we can all think of some examples over the past years, right? Let's hope it won't happen again. But during the pandemic, during COVID, yeah, many specific products were restricted. Many face masks were imported all over the world to ensure safety. But we can also think about natural disasters like hurricanes or um, other specific regulations to facilitate recovery. We also have food security, think of shortages, and also economic emergencies. So the World Trade Organization basically helps to think of provisions that will allow members to temporarily, not permanently, temporarily deviate from their normal obligations. So think about really severe unforeseen circumstances that may require immediate attention and action to protect vital, even more important interests, even at the expense of international trade, because this needs to be addressed first and be prioritized. Now, there's also called the unfair trading practices, namely dumping. What is dumping? Dumping basically occurs when a company exports products at prices lower than those charged in its home market or below production costs. Now, what is the danger here? This can really cause severe damage, because if this happens, then you can harm domestic industries, meaning industries within your own country, because the importing country, if you undercut local producers, this can really cause severe damage. This could be a high risk, and the World Trade Organization does not prohibit dumping itself, but it does allow countries to take action against it through anti-dumping measures when it causes material injury. So this is important. Now, what can you think of? Like, we need, first of all, then evidence of dumping by foreign exporters. There must be a specific link between the dumping and the injury, and there must be material injury as well caused to the domestic industry. So anti-dumping actions have become more common in international trades over the past years, and they can lead to many disputes between trading partners as well. Now, this is a bit more up to date. If we think about the geopolitical shifts and trade wars, what we can see here is that global trade over the past years is being reshaped, and we have rising tensions, especially if we think about Russia and Ukraine, or United States and China. And yeah, we can see that there have been more than 45 new anti-dumping orders imposed by the states in 2024. In Europe, we had stricter sanctions on Russia and on subsidies for strategic industries. And the World Trade Organization got a lot of criticism because they have a slow dispute resolution method, but it's still critical for setting rules. So as we can see here, it's difficult to find a balance between the interests of different parties involved. We have also noticed that the world's becoming more digitalized. So for example, if you think about paperwork, do we need signatures still on paper, or could an electronic signature also be legally binding? Now, in 2024, last year, there was the World Trade Organization e-commerce agreement. This was signed by 91 countries, which is quite a lot. And that helps to modernize cross-border digital transactions and e-commerce by eliminating customs paperwork. So we can help digital transactions and be recognized as well on a global level. Think about e-signatures, digital contracts, etc. This is a really important aspect over the past years. We also have more cross-border data flows because we have more data between different countries, right? So we have more flow of information, customer information, privacy concerns, concerns about data that we still maybe need more rules for, like we have to address specific digital trade developments, for example, if there's any data leak. And then we can also think about the cybersecurity, because we have frameworks for cybersecurity risk, but not on this global level yet. And we have to respect the national security concerns because there are rules on a national level as well. So if we think about the e-commerce trade agreement, you can think about modernizing cross-border trades, because it banned customs paperwork for digital transactions, which is really important. And it helped to recognize e-signatures for digital contracts on a global level. And it addresses cybersecurity risks through international cooperation. So which document do you think is now obsolete under the 2024 pact? Is it A, paper invoices, or B, email?
which document is now obsolete under the 2024 Pact, whether paper invoices or email. Zimbabwe, Steve and Ali say A. No, Ali says B. Ali wrote B. David comments, what role will the European Court of Justice play in interpreting new regulations in 2025? That's a question being raised by David Nimeri.
That's a good question. To answer the question, first of all, on the screen, well, which document is now obsolete? Well, it basically helped to acknowledge and recognize electronic signatures and electronic documents. So paper invoices are not needed anymore specifically. Electronic could also be sufficient. The question regarding the European Court, if I understand the question correctly, well, international trade law is more between specific nations. So if we think about countries who are a member of the World Trade Organization, they create rules between the nations specifically. The European Court, for example, could help to address like cybersecurity or other interests of Europe specifically. However, every country has different interests, even within Europe. This is why it's really important for the members, the countries, to be involved, and not only as a European Union, but also as a member itself, because, for example, Ukraine could have different interests than Belgium. So please take into account that the World Trade Organization consists of 166 nations, and it addresses the rules that are needed between the countries to have an international trade together. So if we now think about digital trade rules, do you think, and I'm eager to hear your opinion today, do you think that these should override national data privacy laws? What do you think should have preference here? Could there be a balance between digital trade rules and national data privacy laws?
Once again, brothers and sisters, the chat floor is open for you. Should digital trade rules override national data privacy? And why you think this or that way? Should digital trade rules override national data privacy? Make your game. Collaborate. The invitation is on your end. Thank you for that, Miss Lynette Davidson. No, that is Onyecham, probably Zakaria. No, it shouldn't. Era Maseko. There should be a balance, but the digital trade wars are growing. That is Steve Calpi. National dealer privacy is paramount, Godfrey. I think they need to collaborate. John Charles say national data privacy laws are a matter of national security. As such, national interests should override, should prevail. There, not necessarily trade laws are too limiting. Should work hand in hand. George Bita. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your wonderful input.
Thank you for sharing your input with us today. That's really important. Yeah, like we discussed today, digital trade rules, they should balance national data privacy laws. And if there is anything missing or countries are seeking, it should try to aim the interests of all parties involved. So it shouldn't override, it should take the interest into account. Now, if we think about human rights in trade, given the time, I would like to discuss a few more examples with you today. But if we think about sustainability and human rights in trade, we can think about the environment that we have to protect, labor standards, also think about forced labor, and certification systems. Now, if you think, for example, about forced labor bans, there was the US block on goods for specific goods in a Chinese region to address human rights concerns through trade measures as well. Now, this is a sheet you can later read through by yourself. But if we now think about human rights and trade sanctions, as we have seen over the past years, do you think that trade sanctions can effectively enforce human rights? Because this could be a really important item to think about, because we don't only think about trade law, about a economic factor, but also about the human rights involved that help to create any economy, right? Because people can build an economy together, or create specific products, or children labor. Do you think trade sanctions can help to enforce human rights? Is there any balance here?
We already have two no answers from parties Khan and Saminu Abdulaki. They think no, trade sanctions can not effectively enforce human rights.
That's a good answer. Given the time, we will go to the answer, so we have some more time to discuss if we have any questions. We're almost at the end of today's lecture as well. Now, can trade sanctions effectively enforce human rights? The question is here, is it effective, right? Because trade sanctions, they can be a tool to enforce human rights because it exerts economic pressure on nations or entities that violate these rights. But the question is it effective? Because this is based on different factors. Think about the targeted country's economy, the specific nature of the sanctions, and the international community's unity. So if we now think about examples, I have two examples regarding human rights and trade sanctions we can think of that were quite severe over the past years. We can think about South Africa, for example, during the apartheid periods. Now, what happened on a global level? International sanctions were imposed against South Africa because it had apartheid policies. I'm not sure if you are familiar with the apartheid policies, but these are really, really terrible, and they included racial discrimination and oppression of the Black majority. Now, what these sanctions do, they included trade embargoes, for example, financial restrictions, etc. And it did help to strengthen domestic movements for change. So trade sanctions, they can help to enforce human rights. However, it's the question if you're able to measure its effectiveness, because that depends also on the parties involved that will allow the movements to change. The last example is Russia and Ukraine. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, many countries imposed sanctions in response to human rights violations. And yeah, even though we are aware of the significant impact on the economy, it can also have an immediate effect on human rights. And we still have to see what will be the effect on a long term, right? So, in conclusion, while trade sanctions, they can raise awareness and they can help to apply pressure, um, its success is not guaranteed, and it can sometimes lead to negative consequences as well. Think about work opportunities for people in the country involved, or the negative impact it can have on the economy. So the question, is it effective? That really depends on the level of international cooperation and the targeted country's resilience and the design of sanctions. There is not a yes or a no we can put here to answer the question. Now, as a final question, I wanted to ask if you have any rule you would design for the World Trade Organization for the future. Maybe you have any idea if you could create any rule, what would it be? However, we passed the time already, so I think if there are any questions, ladies and gentlemen, you can ask them now. We still have a minute or two. before we need to conclude the lecture of today. And I really want to thank you all for being here today and participate and share your insights with us as well.
Thank you very much, Miss Lynette Davidson. Your presentation has proved really magnificent from all vantage points, and I thank you on behalf of Atlantic International University. Pretty much like you just pointed it out, we are now out of time, but we're going to manage anyway to accommodate one or two or three questions, maybe, beginning with John Akipeji. The floor is yours. John, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Davidson, for the lectures and the materials you've shared so far. And also thank you, Dr. Valsen. I hope I'm correct.
You are correct. You're welcome, brother.
I raise a particular concerning the question before the last. I said over the years, the sanctions have only been effective on developing countries. When sanctions are imposed concerning, for instance, let's take Russia-Ukraine war, for instance, you can see that almost every other country in the world, especially in Europe, place sanction, and in from America, North America also place sanction on Russia. But how effective are those sanctions? They are only effective on developing nations, third world countries. That is what I've discovered over the years. Like you made an example of South Africa, for instance, during the apartheid. Yes, they used sanctions to make sure the issue of apartheid was put to an end. But when it involves developed nations, strong nations, the G7, the G20, we don't see those sanctions as effective as they should be.
Thank you for your comments,
Thank you for sharing.
John.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. It's really helpful. I do agree. If it's a developed country involved, the effect could be much more immersed, right? It could be much more severe because they have a more vulnerable economy, so the effect and impact could be even bigger than on a G7 country. However, the measurements or the sanctions could also have a very severe impact on the country involved, like Russia, for example. Many people left the country to find a job abroad or to escape from the situation. So it can still have a very impact on the country involved, but it depends on the international cooperation, the trade sanction itself. What does the trade sanction mean? Who are the people who will be affected? And for developing countries, it's usually more severe because of their vulnerable economy, unfortunately. It's really
Thank you
difficult to find a balance here.
Thank you. I don't see any other hand up at this time, but I still would like to read a question on the chat channel from Godwin Hiwe, and this is what he asked. Please, can we have your comments on NAFTA trade or tariff war? Ms. Davidson.
Enough to trade and tariff war. Well, I think it really depends like on the countries involved and would it really affect their economy in the end. Because I think even if we have a tariff war or specific rules or trade sanctions, I think it's still about the legal landscape, but also the economy and who is the president involved. What are you trying to regulate, or what specific consequence would you like to create by a tariff war? It could have a very big impact and it can definitely lead to a change. But some countries, for example, if they have different types of interests, maybe a tariff war could not be the best measurement to take into account. So I think it really depends on the economy of the countries involved, the parties involved, their interests involved, to think about the impact it has as well. I don't think we can give an abstract answer here. And if we think about trade sanctions and tariff wars, I think it's quite likely that there will always be a dispute between different countries because it's about money, it's about different policies, it's about different type of majorities, trade embargoes, investment, financial interests. So I think the World Trade Organization can definitely help to seek a balance between the different countries' interests. However, I do think we need specific rules for the future to help create a better balance. And that's why I think it's really important to be involved as a member as well to seek a balance between the interests of the countries involved as well.